Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for setting this time aside to engage with this conversation that I'm about to have with a good friend of mine, Stephanie. Now, I'm just going to invite Steph into the chat if you just want to give us 1 second, and then we're going to dive into a really juicy topic. One that I'm with it. Maybe we've been on the receiving end of it. Maybe we have even done it ourselves. And you know what? All of this is part of the human experience. We're all learning, right? And the whole point is now we're going to empower one another with some insights, right? So that now we can know better and we can then do better. So I'm just waiting for Steph to accept our invite and we will jump on in. Hey, Steph, I just accepted the invite or the request that you just sent on over. So I think we should be good to go any second. And for everyone who earmarked this, opportunity to tune in for this live conversation, really just want to extend a heartfelt gratitude to you. We both know that you have a lot of things that are competing for your attention on any given day, and for you to tune in and share this time with us really means a whole lot. So there she is. Hey there, Steph.
Hey, hello, brother.
How are you?
I'm so good. How are
I'm
you?
doing really well. Thank you. Where are you coming to us from today?
I am in the Andes of Peru, in
Wow,
the Sacred Valley of Peru. Yeah, it's
incredible.
the sun is about to set here in the mountains. It's super beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I'm actually in Costa Rica right now. So, it's really awesome to be, getting more stamps from that passport and just seeing all these new lands, for the first time and rediscovering them even every time we return, right?
Yeah, yeah. Blessings to you, brother. Thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Ab- Absolutely. You're most welcome. And thank you for accepting my invite to have what I imagine is kind of a prickly conversation. When it came to me, it's something that's kind of been, I've experienced, right? I think I've probably been on both sides of it. Let me be real about it. And, I was thinking to myself, this is a really important conversation for us to have around spiritual bypassing. And so as I was thinking, who can I talk to this about? Your name just kept flashing in my head. And I said, you know what? I think Steph is actually the perfect person. And, before I'm not even going to say why. I'll let you introduce yourself to everyone who's tuned in for today. And I think they'll be able to piece together why exactly you might be one of the best people for me to talk to about this.
I don't know if I'm the best, but it's alive. It's a feeling that's alive in me is like what is authentic and to back it up a little bit. Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm a holistic empowerment guide, and so I work with people who are standing at the precipice of significant life change and feeling afraid to fall but unable to turn back and ready to fly. And one of my signature offerings is Empower Your Voice. And while it's about singing, in some ways, so much of my work these days is about authentic expression. And what that has meant is that has called me into a journey of getting real as fuck. And these conversations I love because, we can like bring out these juicy questions and these things that are a little bit like, people don't want to talk about. And in doing so, I feel I would like to invite others to step into their own authentic expression in a way where it's like, let's be perfectly imperfect. Let's be real. Let's be willing to make mistakes. One of the things with going live, and I'm sure you know this, Josh, is like there's always the feeling of like, what if I say something I can't take back?
Yeah,
And it's live and it's there and there's no editing. And it's like, that's perfect. That's exactly what it needs to be is these like raw conversations. So.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love how you introduce yourself there. And for everyone who's watching, Steph and I only met this year, and it was earlier in February in Guatemala, where she was one of the co-facilitators for a retreat that I was at. And Steph, I mean, you held us beautifully to do that, embody authenticity and our voice. It was. I've never been one who uses my voice out loud. I have a lot of thoughts, right? But I really leaned into that introvertedness, and singing out loud was never a thing unless I'm absolutely alone in the safety of my gym, out of earshot of anybody. And so being around you and the way you facilitated that experience, really helping us to get in touch with our voice, really did a whole lot. And I think that's definitely one of the core reasons why we're here today having this conversation. So thank you so, so much for doing what you do. And, as we have this conversation and even share with others how they can connect with you towards the end, I think they'll also see just how powerful the medicine that you bring to the table is. And, I do hope that they certainly engage and allow themselves to be curious about it because it's a big one. So,
Thank you.
without further ado, I would love for us to just jump into our conversation. And for those, yeah, for those who have seen, us ad or, giving you some ads about we're about to have this conversation, in case you're unfamiliar with the concept of spiritual bypassing, I just have a brief definition that I want to share with you just so we can all get on the same page. And then we're going to sort of dive in and share our own unique, authentic experiences with it and our insights
Mm,
around it. So,
mhm,
what I have here is spiritual bypassing is the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to avoid confronting difficult emotional, psychological, or developmental issues. It's essentially using spirituality as a way to sidestep personal challenges or unresolved wounds rather than directly addressing them. So, that's big. And no matter where I turn, be that on, an Instagram feed or even on LinkedIn, where people think, this is just about business, you find a lot of folks who are really trying to lean into that positive mindset, really trying to uplift others and things like that. But I'll be honest, at certain points, I kind of pull myself back and I'm like, hey, that kind of, yeah, yes and no. There's a little bit more to what you're sharing here. It can't be a complete conversation in and of itself. So, that's why I thought it deserves a little more attention. And so, Steph, maybe to start, what is, if we start at the basics of the words that we're using today, right? What does spirituality mean to you? How is it that how do you relate to this word?
I love that question. Thank you for bringing that up. I feel, first of all, I want to address that, or I want to acknowledge that spirituality can mean different things to different people. But from my perspective and my experience, I feel that at the center of spirituality is curiosity. And I feel it's a curiosity that starts to open up in us when we recognize, oh my goodness, there is this giant mystery out there, and there's this giant mystery in here.
Mm,
And I may never solve the mystery,
right.
but I so want to dive in. And I feel like spirituality is getting curious. It's starting to ask the questions. It's starting to allow ourselves to tap into this like expansive, infinite unknown that we will never fully know.
Mm.
And I really feel that spirituality lives in the body.
Oh,
Spirituality is not something that's like out there
mm,
or up
right.
there. I feel like spirituality is an embodied experience of the mystery.
Mm, love that. I love that. And so, when you hear the term spiritual bypassing, right? How is it that you personally define it, I guess, as you've seen it?
Choo, yeah. Before diving into that, I
Sure.
just want to say that like let's not shame any of this. I don't want to shame spiritual bypassing because I really feel like in some ways I understand why it happens and I want to
Mm,
further understand why we go into spiritual bypassing. So let's like set aside the
yeah,
shame
definitely. Yeah,
and just dive
absolutely.
in with this curiosity, right? And
Perfect.
I feel to me spiritual bypassing is a sort of turning away from the muck of life. It's turning away from discomfort. It's turning away from difficult feelings and emotions in the body. It's turning away from, relational issues that may be challenging. It's like turning away. And I feel like it's turning towards this sort of unattainable carrot that is perfect bliss. This like
Mm,
dangling carrot.
yeah.
As you get closer to it, it like gets a little further
Yeah.
away. And so I feel like spiritual bypassing is in some ways this like chasing of this dangling carrot, which is this bliss that I feel when we can't fully bring that bliss into the mundane of life and the muck of life,
Mm,
we are spiritually bypassing.
mm,
Um, and you know, uh, something that comes through for me, my business name, my entity, my baby is Rise and Thrive, holistic empowerment. And I feel like when we're spiritually bypassing, and we've all done it, by the way, I've done it.
Yeah.
I feel like when we're spiritually bypassing, we're trying to rise above something rather than rise through it. Meaning, rather than look at some of the challenging aspects of our life honestly, with curiosity, with a willingness to explore, that would be rising through, but
Mm.
rising above is like, I'm just gonna be over here and I don't even want to touch this down
Right.
here.
Yeah,
And I feel like that's not sustainable because we will crash back into the muck until the muck is seen and witnessed and felt by us.
definitely. So do you find like it's in your experience at least, or maybe if you talk about like how even your own growing through it, right? Was that
Mhm.
kind of a conscious decision that you made that, oh my gosh, this thing over here feels really uncomfortable. I'm going to avoid it and run for the hills away from it. And that's how I'm going to overcome it. Or was it more something that just happened subconsciously as almost like a survival tactic, if you will?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And that this is why I want to take the shame out of spiritual bypassing and like
Yeah.
really address it honestly, because I feel that in some ways it's actually a mechanism that serves us, when there is a trauma response in the body and our window of tolerance and our ability to actually be with pain or discomfort is like this small,
Yeah.
we can't go into some of this stuff. So sometimes we actually have to spiritually bypass and say, I'm just going to choose to be happy right
Right.
now. I
Right.
can't look at that. My nervous system is on fire. I need to choose to be happy right
For
now.
sure.
um, so me personally, I mean, when I look at spiritually bypassing, I'm like, maybe it actually serves a role
Hmm.
sometimes. Maybe it's actually not this like evil thing that we think it is. And I feel like I feel like also there's a time and place where we need to start to look at our stuff and get honest and start to take accountability for our own responses to things.
Yeah, I agree with you on that 100%. And of course, it's definitely hard to like look at ourselves and be like, oh my gosh, these are also parts of me. All of these things that, typically, in all of our experience, right? We try to cover up what it is that's happening that we feel is happening on the inside and we're hoping isn't reflecting on the outside, right? Like I
Mhm.
find, for example, the biggest guys in the gym, those are often the guys who have the most crap within them, the most unresolved stuff, but they just keep going to the dumbbell curl, right? And thinking, hey, that's going to bring me the solace and the peace, right? And while it can do that in that moment, sure. When we keep stacking these moments and these, like, okay, how do I numb this thing or try to sweep it under the rug? If we do that enough, I mean, that can turn into a whole lifetime. And then we just keep having these like anchors almost that we're walking. We're trying to walk forward, but it's like dragging us down, right? So I guess I mean for you when you came to the realization, hey, at certain times I'm doing this for a little bit longer than actually serves me well. What were you able to do or what did you look for in yourself or notice? Hey, I'm doing this, and now it's time to pull myself out. How did you really understand this is the time to press the eject button?
Hmm. Sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's not. I feel that sometimes life just keeps showing up in ways to say, hey, Steph, you're going to look at this thing you've been avoiding.
Yeah,
It's like slap, slap, it's coming at me from all angles,
right,
and like, okay, I'm going in. But for me personally, what I noticed is what I felt in my body. And I always come home to the body. That's a big part of my work. What I felt in the body when I was ignoring perhaps some realness within me, some real feelings that were discomfortable, uncomfortable,
right,
um, unsettling,
yeah,
and I felt that my body started to, pain started to show up in my body, like symptoms of some chronic stuff, like chronic allergies and other things. And it's like my body was finding all these ways to speak up and say, hey, Steph, it's time you like allow yourself to see what's going on within.
right,
So for me, it was a matter of like, do I want to survive and be like baseline healthy?
right.
Or do I want to really thrive and like fully allow all parts of me to express
Mm,
themselves? And that's
mm,
not easy, it's not easy. It's like sometimes it's terrifying. Um, but one thing I feel is also, I want to address that sometimes when we're like talking about spiritual bypassing, let's also talk about what happens on the opposite side of that. You know, sometimes spiritual bypassing is over here, and for me, that sounds like it's all love and light, high vibes only.
Yeah, I
Pure
hear it.
souls only. If you're not pure enough, you can't enter. You know, this is the
Yep,
spiritual bypassing. It's like purity hierarchy, right?
definitely.
And I feel like on the flip side of that is this obsession with shadow work and trauma work. And
Mhm.
I don't think shadow work or trauma work is wrong, but I think that sometimes we can go into that so deep that we get stuck in it. So it's almost like we've got to find this place in the middle that is like, yeah, there's a time where I need to turn to the light and I need to like choose to be happy actively. And there's a time where I need to look at some of the stuff that's less comfortable within me, you know, and within my world. It's like I got to be willing to open my lens and witness a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Um, but here's the thing. I also want to like take away this this like labeling we've given to the light and dark,
Yeah.
right? We say light is good, dark is bad. I'm like, holy crap. Have you seen how like a baby grows in the dark womb of a mother
Right.
and like that creates life in the darkness for 9 months? Have you seen how a seed sits in the fertile soil of Mother Earth and like slowly germinates in the darkness long before it ever touches the light? You know, so I
Right.
think we need to get rid of this like light and dark, good and bad thing and just say, hey, it's all a part of existence. Let's look at all of
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. No, I like that. I really like that. And, that's a conversation or that's a direction that a conversation has been going more and more lately, I find. And even the conversations I see taking place where I'm not involved, like say online, comments and things like that, where people are talking about that a little more, where,
Mm,
typically if left unchecked, someone might have this impression that spirituality is just this love and light and unicorns and rainbows, right?
yeah.
And it's not to say that that's not part of it, but that's only
Mhm.
part of it, right? Like, how did we get here? How do we even get to frame something as unicorns and rainbows if we didn't have the other stuff, right? We have to have something to have a distinction, right?
Yeah.
And I know what it's like to feel like, what, I have so much on my plate right now. There's absolutely no way that I can now try and break me down and apart and see what these pieces represent and put me back together while I have the weight of the world on my shoulders and these other responsibilities and things like that for myself, because I already feel so behind and like I'm so not enough that I can't look myself super hard in the mirror and be like, you know what, that observation was right. Or, yeah, shoot, you know what, I'm actually not as far along as I really thought I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing that a lot more. And, I definitely encourage that other side of it, right? Allowing space for multiple things to be true, right? Where, sure, you're on your path, right? We're all spiritual beings and all that stuff, right? But, part of this, even I guess, in a way to get to this, feeling like you're ascending, if you will, is you almost have to call yourself on your bullshit when you spiritually bypass, right? You have to get so good that you recognize it within yourself that, oh, you know what, I'm leaving some gains on the table here by not thinking how could I have improved that or done that better, or what skills do I need to perhaps empower myself with to champion some of these challenges.
Yeah.
I've definitely found that as well. Um, you know, for you in working with so many people and even just working with yourself, right? We're a whole project all in ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Do you think that spiritual bypassing actually impacts our relationship with ourselves and others? And if so, how do you see that play out?
Ooh, it's a really good question. Yeah. I feel that I feel that when we spiritually bypass, we're immediately creating a sense of separation.
Hmm.
You know, it's saying like that over there is bad. I'm going to go to what's good. And I feel that when we do that in ourselves, first of all, like when we're not willing to look at aspects of ourselves, it's like we're we're casting parts of us out of the circle,
Mhm.
and we're becoming these like unintegrated, fragmented beings. And when we do this, I feel like we're just creating more and more separation, more and more tension, more and more dis-ease within. And then, of course, we're doing that in our relationships, in our communities, in our families, you know. Um, and I've done it, you know.
Yeah.
I've totally done it so many times, and you know, where I catch myself. Perhaps especially earlier on in my, like, we'll call it spiritual journey, but you know, when I started to ask the questions and get curious about this mystery, you know, and I immediately started noticing how people in my family or my friend circle were just like not willing to ask these questions, and I felt myself kind of like creating a wall between myself and them, you know, like in some way it was almost like, oh, you're not willing to experience the mystery of life. You're not up here with
Ah,
me. You know,
okay.
and it took me a while to honestly catch myself doing that and go, wait a minute, that's just creating divide in my family. And in some ways, we're all experiencing and questioning the mystery of life in our own ways. There is no I believe there is no one path to be spiritual. I believe that we are all spiritual, whether we're trying to be or not. And it's just a matter of whether or not we're getting curious and how that looks for us. But yeah, to answer your question, I feel like how the spiritual bypassing can impact ourselves and our relationships is really, it just creates further separation and divide where I feel what we actually want and desire in this life is harmony and union, you
Yeah.
know? It's what we all like yearn for, I feel. So,
Yeah, I agree. You know, I think a big part of it, like when I see it happening, or even when I think back to when I've done that myself, I think like, okay, was that a response because I didn't feel like the people around me would accept all of me, right? They
mhm.
only needed the happy, high achiever, optically everything looks good kind of guy. But then I had to step back and really address myself a little more directly and be like, okay, them aside, can I even accept myself with all of these things? Or am I living in this internal conflict of constant rejection of parts of myself? So, how is it that I can expect to be on the receiving end of that when I can't even give that to myself?
And that's that, like, I love that you brought that up because I feel like that is an invitation right there for all of us to allow for the messiness of all parts of ourselves, all parts of this life, you know, and like that word messiness just keeps coming to mind. Like this life is a wild and beautiful mess, you know? And so are we. And I think, you know, maybe you can relate to this, Josh, but like being someone who is working within and leading within the wellness industry to some degree, there is that pressure. And I have felt that myself, this pressure to like, to be performative, to be performative in my spirituality and to always be like happy and shiny and smiley and always be well and strong and vital. And when I'm not, it's like, oh, I don't want the world to see that. At least that's the way it was. Now I'm kind of like, let's strip the mask off, let's take the veils off, and like, yeah, if I'm gonna cry, I'm gonna let some people see that. You know, if I'm feeling angry, I'm gonna let some people see that. And I feel like us revealing our mess, like just putting our mess on the table, so to
Yeah.
speak, invites everybody. It's like, let's be in this mess together, guys.
No, that's amazing. And I do totally relate to that because before I started to, I guess, even include as part of my identity or my passions that, I want to be in service to others and support them through this way, that way, all that. I did feel that. I felt like, oh, hang on, shouldn't I have it a little more together than I do right now?
Mhm.
And the thing is, it kind of goes back to your comment kind of about that moving carrot, right? It's like,
Yeah.
well, no one's ever in this pure state of bliss. So to even imagine that that's a possibility is doing ourselves a disservice and proves that yes, we're not ready to lead others,
Mhm.
right? Because we need to accept that this is just an ongoing thing that we'll need to work on and invest time in and invest time into ourselves so that we can work more towards that acceptance, right? And so that's kind of what I found. So when I was doing all of the things and, reading this and getting this certification and, going to this class and all that, I started to see that as much as I'm embracing that, life was still making my mess surface.
Mm.
So it made me see, okay, you know what? The mess is coming along whether I wanted to or not. So I think when I got to that place that you described for yourself, it was kind of like, okay, well, you know what? I can be in this space, but let me not do a disservice to those around me to make them think and strive towards this perfect, impossible, unreal ideal that Josh never cries, that Josh never has a hard day and feels like, oh, I just want to give up and came through all this stuff that feels insurmountable, right? I really wanted to lead with that honesty and vulnerability. And, one place that really highlighted to me the importance of that is when I would lead men's retreats, right? And, we would have the sharing time and I would just be like, okay, you know what? I need to make sure these guys don't see me as like here and they're here. I need them to see that we are the same. Our struggles are the same, right? So, I would
Mhm.
open up about insecurities and different things that I felt and all of this. And all of a sudden they're like, we were not expecting that to happen and this type of thing. This is not what we're used to in the spiritual space, right? It's a lot of, just love and light, mala beads, white clothes, and, life is perfect at all times. And, to me, I'm curious about you. How do you feel about that? Because I personally feel that as well as those practitioners are leading and giving their messages and whatnot, they're leaving part of the story out. And so I felt it almost was leading people a little bit astray.
Thank you for saying that, leaving part of the story out. That really, really resonates. And I've been there. I've left part of the story out for a long time,
Yeah.
because I felt like I needed to show up in a certain very performative way. And yeah, you feel it, right? Like in my experience, I feel it when I'm like, that's only a part of who they
Yeah.
are. That's a very small part of who they are. And I've been living and traveling in like quote unquote conscious communities.
Mhm.
I don't like really saying that because you know, it's like communities that call themselves conscious,
Yeah.
right? And to some degree, yes, there's a willingness and a curiosity. That curiosity I spoke about. There's like in these communities that curiosity is alive, and there's a willingness to explore the many, many layers of the mystery in our world and within. And so in some ways, yes, they are conscious. In some ways, I feel like they're very, very unconscious because, there's this they're creating a separation between them and the rest of the world. There's this
Yeah.
like I tell people I'm going to Canada or the US and they're like, don't go back into the matrix. And I'm like, well, isn't this a matrix too? It's all like they're all
Fair.
different matrices and like frankly, if we can't move through all of it, what's the point of our spiritual practice?
Mhm.
And also I feel like that does a disservice to the people in Canada and my communities who don't call themselves a conscious community, but who are like showing up every day to feed their children, and they're like doing the hard work to make sure they get by in life, or they're loving each other. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're wearing white and wearing mala beads and chanting all day. It's like spirituality shows up in all the different ways, right? And so I don't even like want to say conscious community or non-conscious community, because to me it's like consciousness exists in all of us everywhere, and I hope that doesn't sound like spiritual bypassing to say
No,
that.
how ironic that
We
would
are
be.
all one and consciousness is in all of us, but it's fucking true.
I love that. I love that. And
Oh.
that leads me to my next sort of question for you, right?
Mm,
What I see is that when we maybe came from a dark place, right, and now we just really we want to just be more mindful to infuse positivity into our everyday, right? Whereas before it might have been like, ah, like now I have to go down and I have to make the kids, their lunch and send them off to school, and then I have to get to this meeting I hate, and all these different things, right? It could be, we reframe those things like I get to, right? And what an honor. And not everyone gets to have kids. So I'm going to appreciate these moments. And they won't always need me all the time. So we lean into more of that positivity, right? And what I've seen when it comes to moments, I guess, where I might feel like, hey, is spiritual bypassing happening here? Is like I sometimes see us, and even reflecting back to myself and how I've done things before, sometimes it just seems like super, super positive, like almost, I've heard it referred to as toxic positivity, to
Mm,
the point that now we aren't acknowledging that there's a little bit of healing to do. Like we can't just,
mhm,
healing is not just using positive words and imagining that what happened didn't happen,
mhm.
right? So, my question to you, I guess, is really about how do you feel it interferes with the healing process? As much as it can take us to a point where now we maybe have a bit more of a positive mindset, right? Do
Mhm.
you feel like that only takes us so far, or what's your take on that?
You know, that's a juicy one. I've been reflecting on this because interestingly, from a neuroscience perspective, when we have what's called a negativity bias, meaning the neural grooves in our brain body immediately jump to negative assumptions about things,
Mm,
negative feelings towards things. Um, when we have a negativity bias that is like grooved in our brain and body, reframe and to form a positivity bias, meaning to like start leaning into the energy of appreciation, of seeing the gifts in things, of being grateful, of not assuming the worst all the time. We actually have to practice that over and over and over again to like form that new neural groove until that becomes the default, our positivity bias. So in some ways, and I don't see that as spiritually bypassing, I see that as training. It's like we're actually training
yeah.
ourselves to see the world in a different way.
Mm,
And that doesn't mean that hard stuff is not going to happen. That doesn't mean I'm never going to feel pain in my body, or I'm not going to lose loved ones,
mm,
or I'm not going to suffer financially. So I feel like, when we're training ourselves to be able to live in a more, let's call it joyful state of being, like that's not a happiness that's fixated on any one thing, but just a joyful state of being, that
mm.
takes training sometimes. We're not always born with that. Well, I think kids are born with that actually.
Yeah.
It gets grooved out of them. But then it's like yes and it's like,
Mm,
for a long time, I was like, I will not look at any news. I will not look at politics. I will not look, because I had to like get away from that stuff in order to like feel good again in
yeah.
my body, and feel like, okay, the world is not such a horrible place. But now I'm in a place where I'm like, I actually want to look at that stuff sometimes, because I want to know what's going on with my brothers and sisters around the world. That doesn't mean I want to like dive into it in a way where I'm obsessing with it, but it means it's like there's a time to be focused in one direction, and then there's a time to broaden the lens, I
Right.
feel. So both serve, in my opinion. What's your
Gotcha.
feeling?
No, I agree. You make a really great point, and I think that maybe, maybe where the opportunities where like the spirit gets a little irritated is kind of like, you might know some people intimately, right? Like you've known them for years, right? And now it's kind of just like, oh wow, that was like 13 positive only posts in a row. You know, um, you're not like that in real life. Like that happens, right? So I guess for me, it's true. It's all kind of part of this evolution of how we get there, right? And sometimes
Mhm.
we might feel like we have done a bit more of the, swing to the other side and then balance it out because we understand that everything has a place in there. And it's like we almost express frustration toward a younger version of ourselves who didn't get to that balance, right? As others are figuring out that hey, there's actually a little bit more to than just swinging straight to the positive and we just live there, kind of thing, right? So I think that that's probably what happens quite a bit, and that in itself, I'll say it's a human response, but I think it also shows us how much work there still exists within all of us, right? For
Yeah.
forms of acceptance, as much as like it's not to say that there is a hierarchy, right? But if we say there's almost a trajectory that typical trajectory that one follows, right?
Yeah.
I think that
You know,
that's maybe part of where the frustration at times comes from.
yeah. Yeah. Sorry to jump in there. I just got
No worries.
excited.
Yeah.
What's like popping into my awareness right now is in the Zen tradition, there's the Bodhisattva.
Okay.
And the bodhisattva is someone who is seeking enlightenment and spends the majority of their life like climbing the mountain, so to speak, to
Okay.
reach that pinnacle of enlightenment at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And when they do, they experience bliss and enlightenment and all the things. And then they look down the mountain and they see their brothers and sisters struggling. They see famine, they see this, they see anger, violence, war, all these things. And they decide, well, how can I just sit here on this mountaintop in bliss while my loved ones are suffering?
Mm.
So the bodhisattva decides, I'm going to go back down into the muck. I'm going to go back down the mountain. I'm going to help other people climb the mountain, and I'm going to keep doing this until all of us are free. And if it takes me a million lifetimes, I'm going to do it. So it's like, yes, there's a time where we're like climbing the mountain, so to speak, and we're on our journey, and that's where we need to focus. And then if inevitably we're like, wait a minute, I can't just stay here.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
work to be done.
Yeah. No, that's so true. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate
Yeah.
that. I'll definitely look into more of that. But, I guess one question I have for you is,
Mm.
as you yourself has evolved as a human who is in service and in service to yourself, first and foremost, what are some of the ways that you found to be especially effective at helping to address in a very compassionate but effective way that, hey, friend over here, I kind of feel, and I say this from a place of love, that you're kind of avoiding something. You're kind of bypassing something here, right? Because I
Yeah.
think we're all probably more familiar with that harsh approach of like, hey, loser, like, what the hell? And, you just lay into somebody, right? How can people, I guess, say this and address this with their loved ones? And even in speaking to themselves, like self-talk is such a huge thing to me, right? What are some more effective, softer, while still impactful ways that we can address this and help to shed light on it so that, the people we're trying to help at the core of what we're saying, even if it comes across as incredibly irritated, that message
Mm.
actually gets through.
Mm. Wow, super beautiful question. Um, I love this very simple three-word question that we can ask to ourselves to catch ourselves in moments of bypassing. We can
Okay.
also ask to each other, and it's just simply, is it true?
Mm. Mm.
And we can say that with all the love in the world, just is it true?
Yeah.
Um, and I also love actually that reminds me of, and I know you study Brene Brown's work
Yeah.
on vulnerability,
Yeah.
and I think you've mentioned this actually, so this might not be new to you, but I love the phrase she uses, the story I'm telling myself is,
Love that.
like
Yeah.
this, like when we catch ourselves in those moments of like, spinning an anxious story or, assuming the worst. It's like the story I'm telling myself is, and immediately that makes it a story. Now, how we can take that to other people is it, say someone's talking to you and you're like, I'm picking up that there's something, below this. We might say, first of all, is that true? Is that really your truth? And then we might say, well, the story I'm telling myself is that there's a little more than what you're telling me, and I'd love to know if that's true or not.
Yeah.
Um, and
Mm.
you know, here's the thing: we can only be a mirror for someone, but we can't do the work for them. And so, to be a mirror for someone, I think all we can do is just reflect back what we're seeing from our perspective, or what we're
Mm.
hearing from our perspective. And that's it. They can do with it what they want.
Yeah.
And again, I want to like take away the shame because I think it's so important to acknowledge that spiritual bypassing is a very natural, bypassing in general,
Yeah.
dissociating, ignoring, pushing away is a very natural human response, especially when in trauma or nervous system overwhelm.
Mhm.
And so, someone might not be able or willing to see what they need to see in that moment. And so all we have to do is hold space and compassion and trust that they will come to it in their own time.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And, I think what we're doing here is very much an effort to humanize even someone who feels they're on their spiritual journey, right?
Mm,
Helping to show that, there are multiple truths that exist at all times as you're taking steps towards loving yourself more and accepting yourself more and all of the healing from all the things that you're coming from, right?
mhm,
And so, I truly do appreciate that. And what I've really seen in my own journey is that in moments where I could have helped, more of the people around me who maybe were engaging in this type of behavior or ultimately were in some ways struggling with something, is I almost felt it was rude to
mm,
ask them a question about it or to sort of, reframe something they said to me. It's like, oh, shoot, that's going to be really disrespectful. I don't want them to think I don't honor their journey. Okay, I'll
mhm,
just sit here and nod and be like, yes, I hear you. And to me, in moments, I thought that's the best way I can show up for the people in my life who I care about, to
mm,
not push back on something, even though it's coming from a place of love and compassion. And the
mhm,
older I've gotten, I'm so grateful that I actually see that the opposite is true.
mhm,
Of course, there's,
mhm.
time and place for it all, but the fact that we might feel like, okay, you know what? As uncomfortable as this might be, I will say this because I'm coming from love.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's what actually builds the intimacy within a relationship. Sometimes
Mhm.
person actually is just begging to have someone say what they're saying back to them or help them feel safe enough to even verbalize this story that they're telling themselves,
Mhm.
right? Because deep down, some a lot of us hold on to these stories, right? And unless we verbalize it or write it out in a journal, we might not even realize how much time and energy we give to these storylines that don't actually fully capture who we are.
Yeah. And there's that curiosity. I'm gonna like bring it back to that piece about curiosity again, is like I feel that by asking people questions, when they're telling me a story and I'm sensing like, no, this isn't what's actually going on. There's something beneath that. I just ask a question and that prompts them to go a little deeper. I'll ask another question rather than like telling them, hey, your truth is this. Even though sometimes we can see it because it's easier to see someone else than it is to see yourself
Right.
sometimes, right? But I feel like that willingness to be curious and ask questions is like then calling them into a deeper inquiry rather than calling them out, which I feel like when you call someone out, it's like, again, it's just pushing away. It doesn't create intimacy, it creates barriers. But when we call them in and say, like, tell me more,
Yeah.
is there a deeper layer to that you'd like to explore? you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like it's so great to just speak what's alive,
Yeah.
cut the shit.
Definitely. Oh, that would save us all so much time, wouldn't it? I love it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
us Canadians, geez, like this is something I've been since being away from Canada for about 7 years now.
Yeah.
I've been like disentangling myself from this Canadian people pleasing, don't ruffle feathers, don't probe, don't. And I'm like, that's just not healthy.
Right. And I think it's so interesting, as both of us being Canadian, I don't even know if we've done the most Canadian thing ever on this live yet, which is apologize to one another for something.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for
Sorry,
exerting.
Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. So, and you having been, someone who has, spent time with different, as you refer to them, conscious communities, right? And being someone in service in the space yourself and having collaborated with so many different people, do you have any advice for people who they themselves want to step into a role of service,
Mm.
right? What are some things that you would tell maybe a younger version of yourself about how would it serve everyone best for us to show up in these spaces?
Mm. Ooh, to show up in these places in service in the best way. I would just say be willing to listen.
Mm,
It's really simple. Be willing to listen because a lot of us, and like, hi, I've been there all the time. When we feel like we have a wisdom or something to share, we just want to like get up on our pulpit and preach.
yep.
And and I think there's so much value in listening. And so what I've been calling more into myself and what I've been inviting other people to step into is this element of listening. Like, can we actually step back from what we think we know and be willing to listen and witness and notice when we want to just be like opinion making about things
Yeah.
in a very knee-jerk reactive way, and when it's actually in service. So there's one question a teacher of mine once shared with me, to check in with ourselves before we go expressing ourselves in our form of service. You know, before we like step into that, ask ourselves, is it beneficial? Is it true? And will it be received? And if it
Yeah.
doesn't meet all three, then like pull back and just be willing to listen for a little while.
Hmm.
But that's
I like that.
just my opinion.
Yeah.
What's yours?
No, thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
listening now.
Yeah, no, I think for me, one of the big things, because I really like to read and see and feel the energy of a given space, right? So I think something that has helped me is I think about, would I want to be on the receiving end of whatever service it is that I'm delivering in the way that I'm delivering it, right? Would I feel like I'm relatable? Would I feel like it's safe enough to ask me a question, right? It's really like that check-in with myself, because so much of what I've done is like observe and then be like, okay, I feel like I've got kind of a blueprint. I kind of have this, short list of do's and don'ts, yada yada. How does this actually translate into what I'm offering, and how did I take those lessons and do something with them, right? So I find that asking myself and constantly checking in with myself, even as I'm doing the retreat or the self mastery session or whatever it happens to be, I try to make sure that I'm not using these spiritual words and making everything feel so ivory tower for everybody,
Mhm,
right? It's like that's the stuff I hate
mhm,
myself. Whether that's in the corporate environment where we tend to use a lot of like three letter acronyms to really keep other people feeling like they're stupid and we need expertise of someone else who's paid like three times what they're paid. I really didn't want that to be the case,
mhm,
right? I
mhm,
wanted everyone to feel safe and welcome, and that there were no barriers to entry in what it is that I'm offering,
mhm,
right? Because that in itself, it goes back to what you were saying a bit earlier. That just creates another level of divide and almost like a feeling of like, there's a hierarchy that I need to ascend through to be
yeah.
on so and so's level. And it's just like, I wouldn't return to something that made me feel this way. So, no, that can't be part of how I approach this thing. So, also, I love what it seems to be a bit of a personal mantra of yours of embracing everything with curiosity,
Mhm.
right? I really try, even in those moments when I'm incredibly irritated. Like, I catch myself and it's like, okay, Josh, send yourself to the corner and reflect on what is happening. Okay. Why? Because I like to look at this stuff instead of it just like, oh, you know what, this thing happened and this is interfering with my life right now. I actually had this reflection as I was walking to the gym like less than a week ago. It's like, you know what? Nothing's interfering with my life. Everything that's happening is my life. So I can't just keep looking at everything as a disruption, right? It has to be something, it's here to show me something because I have a finite amount of time. I won't learn all the lessons in one lifetime, but if this thing is like poking me, chances are it's for my own good. It's
Mhm.
signaling there's discomfort, but there's also healing that'll happen. Much like if you go and you step on something, you're going to get cut, but you're going to heal after, right? So, that's kind of my take on that.
Oh, I love that. And you brought up the word trigger, and that just excited me because, along the topic of spiritual bypassing is this fear of triggering people, you
Mm,
know? And it's this, okay, let's just like turn to love and light. Let's not trigger anyone. Let's not provoke anything. Let's not even look at what's triggering us, and let's just turn to love and light. And I love triggers. It wasn't always that way, but I'm
yeah.
at a point now where I really love triggers. I love being triggered, and I love triggering people because I feel like triggers wake us the fuck up, you know?
Mm, yep.
It's like we need to be willing to get uncomfortable in life. We need to be willing to say the things that aren't always pleasing to people, but are so necessary to cause shifts. And so I just want to thank anyone who's ever triggered me, and I hope that I can continue to trigger people. because I think it's so necessary. And we live in this like society that's like trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. Nobody wants to trigger anybody. And while I also have compassion for those who are living in a trauma response and a trigger is actually dangerous for their nervous system, I have compassion for that. I understand that. And I feel like mm, the antidote to spiritual bypassing in a way is like being willing to be triggered and
Mm,
look at those triggers and unpack them and like, what is that causing in my body and why is that uncomfortable? I want to know more.
right.
And to be willing to trigger other people, which means being willing to like voice something that might not be comfortable for everyone to hear, but it's necessary and you know it, you feel it in your bones.
Right. Which in its own way is almost like allowing our full selves to take up space, right? It's not just like, oh, only nice, proper ribbon in the hair Stephanie is going to show up today, right?
Yeah.
The other one is going to come as well. Exactly. There you go. Right? I love that. I so love that. Um, as someone who, as I see you online, right? Because a lot of, with all of us traveling so much, it's online really that we get to follow along in our journeys and things like that.
Mhm.
What personal practices do you consistently do to keep yourself feeling ready to show up for the world, for yourself, for the people who trust you, throughout your various services and offerings? What are those things that you really hang your hat on?
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I'd say first and foremost is taking sacred pause. And sacred pause for me looks like taking time away from the distractions and the messages and the emails and the information that's constantly coming at me,
Mhm.
and just creating a little bit of a boundary for a moment in time, however big or small, and saying, okay, for now, I'm just going to tune into what's alive for me. What am I feeling in my body? What does my breath feel like in my body? What thoughts are on repeat? Is there anything there worth exploring further? So this sacred pause is everything for me. And, that sometimes looks like meditation. That sometimes looks like a movement practice like yoga or another somatic practice where I'm like taking time to just tune into my body. Walks in nature are
Mhm.
everything for me. Just taking however amount of time I have and just going out and taking a little walk in nature to refresh, to like clear, to connect with the earth and remember that I have everything I need. Every time I'm in nature, any sense of scarcity or fear or unworthiness just evaporates. And it's like, oh, I have everything I need. I'm so supported. Thank you, Mother Earth. Um, and singing for me is everything. Like using the voice is my greatest medicine these days. And so whatever I'm feeling, whatever's moving through me, to voice it, to sing it, to vocalize it, allows it to alchemize and shift so that it's no longer this thing that's stuck in me, but it's now something that I can like use in the world. Maybe it was some anger that was stuck in me and I sing it out, and now I can like take that anger and turn it into a catalyst for change, through
Mhm.
the portal of my voice. So that's
Mhm.
yeah, I'd say those are my big ones right now.
Yeah.
What about
No,
you?
thank you for sharing that. For me, you know what? I think a big one for me is a little bit similar to what you shared. And I created something around this, and it's kind of like put yourself on airplane mode for an hour a day, right? Be unreachable, right? Like I can't tell you, it's so palpable, the energy in an airplane, right? I've noticed this as we traveled over the last year. It's like, when they come on and they say, okay, switch everything to flight mode, all that kind of stuff. It's almost like there's this collective yet unspoken sigh of relief that
Mm,
happens for everybody. It's like,
mm,
yeah, you know what? Even if that spreadsheet meant the world and now the world is ending, you can't reach me. Sorry, I guess we'll have to figure it out. I found like that was such an interesting thing, right? To see like, sure, we could access Wi-Fi and whatever on the plane, but who does, right? Majority of people choose not to. So it's like I need to carry this practice with me when I'm off the plane too. And so I found that's been something really, really great for me. Cacao is so special. We shared so
mm,
much cacao together. Sitting with cacao, and I think something that we also spoke about is cacao has this magical way almost of being what it is you need in the moment. Like it has this very interesting way that it adapts to your body based on what you need. And so sometimes just sitting with a cup of that helps me to just get reconnected with myself and work through some of those complicated emotions I can't put words to in that exact moment. Giving
Mhm.
myself permission to actually do things that have no productivity metric attached to it. And I think the young kids call that having fun. So I give myself permission to actually have fun now, right?
Mhm.
And it whatever that happens to mean to me on a given day, that could vary. But just allowing myself to not be so attached to, we actually were chatting about this as we prepped for this, kind of that those corporate trainings within your brain, like how you're supposed to respond and how quickly and all these kind of things. The
Mhm.
play is so important, not necessarily making myself feel guilty for every single thing that I don't need to
Mhm.
feel guilty about. I think that was more of a reflex
Mhm.
response,
Mhm.
feeling guilty about just about everything.
Mhm.
So, those are some of the things for me. I go to the gym because I feel even though that's working on your body, technically for me, that's about my mind.
Mhm.
And so that helps me to build that discipline and that resilience. And even the practice of paying yourself first. This actually came up with a client the other day.
Mhm.
He was in the Eastern time zone. I'm over here, so it's 2 hours behind, and we're talking early morning. And he also happened to be going to the gym, and he had the reflection later on that, bro, hang on, I just did the math, and that means that over there for you it was this time, and so you were like, in a way, like we were doing the same thing, but you were trying to get to it earlier, right? So understanding the importance of, especially being in service, right? We can sometimes fall into this thing, we just want to give and give and give and give, but one of the best things and biggest realizations I've had in this space is that what people need equally, if not like 0.0%, 1% more, is to see you do the things that you encourage them to do for yourself. And
Mhm.
so I lean into that because I hate hypocrisy. I've
Mhm.
hated every single moment when I've let myself down and be a hypocrite.
Mhm.
So it's like, hang on, Josh, you got to make sure you're good, man. You're doing all the stuff. And a big part of that is often reflecting about when we feel stuck with a challenge, for example, right? We might think, oh, I'm going to go ask so and so. And if they came to us with the same challenge, we would probably have a 10-page detailed response of how we could solve that thing, right? So just making sure I'm trusting myself and figuring out in moments when I don't trust myself why, right?
Yeah.
Because those have all supported me and been part of what I feel helps me to show up my best, on a consistent basis.
I see you and I see the way you show up for your relationships and your work and your life, and it's an inspiration, brother. So thank you.
Thank you. I
Mhm.
appreciate that.
Mhm.
I know we're approaching the hour mark, so I have just a couple more questions for you. And,
Sure.
the first one here is what do you feel the best piece of advice you've ever given is?
Whoa. That I've ever given. I feel the best piece of advice I've ever given is probably the best because it's something that I've embodied and continue to embody. And that is if it's not a full fuck yes in your body, it's a no.
Mm,
That's it.
wow, powerful.
Yeah.
That's so powerful.
Like I think part of the work I do is helping people to start to learn how to feel what a full yes feels like in their body and what a no feels like in their body, and to start to delineate their responses based on, okay, if it's a full yes, let's go for it. Even if it's scary, a full yes can still feel scary, but it feels like a full yes. So I love diving into that with people, and I feel that so often we say yes when it's a no. It's a clear
Mm,
no, but we say yes, right? And there's that people pleasing thing, um, and I remember a teacher of mine, actually, you know her, Ananda.
okay.
Um,
Yeah.
she once said to me, she said, Steph, I fully trust your yes because you also express your no.
Mm,
And
wow.
that was really powerful to me. It's like Yeah, because I'm clear in my no and I'm clear in my yes, and people know that and they can trust it. People know when I'm not clear. I've been not clear and I've been quick to say yes when it was a clear no for me. And people feel that. It's not a full like yes.
Right.
It's a yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. Wow.
So,
That wisdom, that wisdom would, I can't imagine the impact. It's immeasurable, of course, because we can't go back in time, but the impact that that would have had and would have on anybody at any point in time when you receive that. I hope that
mhm,
that message is so received by everybody,
mhm,
because that's so tremendous, right? We do know, we often know,
mhm.
and we often override for one reason or another. And,
Yeah.
that betrayal of self, that one stings deep. And that
Yeah.
impacts how we show up in other relationships, because at the core, we now can't even trust ourselves to be that firm advocate for ourselves
Oof.
when it's a no,
Yeah.
right? Hmm,
Yeah. Oh, I feel like that's a whole other topic for a whole other podcast.
for sure. Sure. No, we can definitely dive into that. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I would love to hear the best piece of advice, or maybe the one that's most alive for you now. I think it can probably shift over a lifetime. Best piece of advice that you have ever received.
Mm. Follow your heart.
Hmm,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've had a few moments in my life where people who love me have reflected, when I've been in a moment of like, which way do I go? Which way? And they've just said, Steph, follow your heart. And the trust that opens up,
yeah,
when someone's not telling me what to do, but rather trusting that my heart knows what to do.
yeah.
Um, those have been some really huge moments in my life.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we need a reminder of that, and it's so great when we can hear those reminders from people outside of ourselves, right? It's
Mhm.
almost that extra level of encouragement, and trust yourself. Bet on yourself. We would bet on you. Bet on yourself. So no, that's
Yeah.
incredible. Well, thank you so much, Steph. And I've learned so much in this conversation. I feel like our connection has deepened. Since this conversation started,
Hmm.
and I have, since we met, I very openly and vulnerably shared some, feelings that I sort of came into the experience with and things like that, and how I'm so grateful that that all shifted, right? That I was so wrong. And, I thank you for showing up the way you do, because it makes such a difference. It
Hmm.
really, really does. And I've seen, we've had conversations while we're kind of just, down by the water or whatever it happens to be. And just talking about this, how you approach things in your work and how you offer your service. The Steph difference to me is abundantly clear. The way you show up in your, how you share your stuff with the world, that's abundantly clear to me. But I would love for you, if you can lean into the almost non-Canadian tendency to not be too humble. Um, could you just share with everyone who's been listening with us about the Steph difference, right? And why they might want to engage with you for the services that you offer? Like what kind of benefits that could provide them and how that could help possibly shift their life if they felt really aligned and connected with you.
Mm. The Steph difference is that I'm not here to promote any doctrine or dogma or tell you there's one way to be and you better listen to me and do what I say. Quite the opposite. My greatest joy is helping other people to access the truth, the wisdom, and the voice within. And so I really feel that part of my work and what I share with people is, rather than, being this like hierarchical teacher who's up here, telling you what to do and how to do it, I actually want to hold your hand and walk with you, and walk with you for a journey, for a moment in time, whether that's, through some one-on-one sessions, whether that's through some of my online trainings and offerings, a retreat in person, or all of the above. And what I actually, in fact, I was reflecting on this the other day. I'm like, my business model sucks. because because I actually don't want to create dependency. I actually don't want you feeling unworthy, like you need to keep grasping for more from me. I want the opposite. I want you to spread your wings and fly, if you're going to work
Yeah.
with me. And so for me, it's like there's this beautiful journey that we share together, and there's a moment in time where everyone I work with feels like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to go fly. I've been working with you, and I'm now ready to spread my wings. I'm now feeling empowered to walk my path and take this back to my communities. And that's what I desire the most. I desire to see the people I work with go and like live their magic and share it with their communities. And as a business model, it really sucks, but I have absolute absolute trust in I know that when I share from this place of like really truly desiring the people I work with, desiring to see them empowered and embodied and expressing in the world in a big way, I really feel that that opens up the flow to reciprocity in ways that, are not always obvious. And I trust that. And so as a business model, it may suck, but as a life purpose, it feels right. So I'm gonna keep following that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for following it because it's made such a world of difference in so many lives. And, for those who do really resonate with everything you're saying and really want to learn how to fly, what's the best way for them to connect with you? Across different platforms, or what's your preferred way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so best way is to just DM me, send me a message and say hi. I'd love to just chat and hear what's alive for you, most importantly, and like human to human. But I also at the link in my bio on Instagram, I know that's like not cool to say anymore, but the link in my bio, I don't care if it's cool, it's what it is, has a bunch of resources in there in terms of some of the various paths you can choose to follow and work with me. And also my website. My website is risethriveholistic.com. But Instagram, go to the link in my bio. Since you're here on Instagram, feels like the easiest avenue.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely, do our best to make sure that people who are looking for you find you because what a gift that would be for them. Steph, thank you so much for taking this time to have this conversation with me. I do hope that, beyond us, people did find value, but, I'm still glad that we had this conversation because it's done wonders for me. I've learned a whole bunch and you've really expanded my mindset as well, just by being here and sharing your wisdom. So thank you for joining me today, and thank you for being here for our viewers. Are there any last words that you want to say to them before we sign off for today?
I mean, I just want to say first of all, to you, Josh, thank you for being willing to have these conversations. I really see you stepping into the uncomfortable conversations in a way that just feels so joyful and easy. So thank you for that. I think the world needs this. And to everybody who's watching, I just want to say thank you so much for also being willing to engage with some uncomfortable conversations and questions. And if I have triggered you in any way, shape, or form, I'm not sorry.
Oh, I love it. What a way to
And
wrap.
I say that with so much love.
Yeah. Well, that's the perfect exclamation point for me. So once again, everybody, thank you for joining us today. Hope you found value. Please let us know in the comments, through direct DMs, all that kind of stuff, how this impacted you. If there's something you're curious about that you'd love to learn more about, also let us know. We'll definitely try to get in touch with you and get you in touch with any resources that might support you as well. So for today, signing off, Steph, once again, thank you for all you bring to this world. Appreciate you. And until next time, everyone.